Good afternoon to most of you, and good morning to some who are in an earlier time zone like myself. My name is Ava Strasser. I am the Gender and Youth Analyst here at Sustainable Energy for All. Thank you all for being here today for the third and final webinar in our summer series, Activating Africa's Green Economy Through Youth Employment. For those who have came to all three webinars, super excited to have you back, and a big shout out for sticking with us this summer. Since we began this journey in June, we've explored exciting pathways for young people to engage in the green economy, and today we are at the bittersweet finish line. But before we close the series, we have an inspiring and insightful conversation ahead focused on jobs and financing, Africa's green transition. We'll look at careers in climate finance and carbon markets. As many of us know, Africa stands at a crossroad with a rapidly growing youth population, urgent climate challenges, and an emerging green energy revolution. And there's never been a better moment for young people to jump into the climate and energy sector. So that's why SEforALL and Shortlist Futures have teamed up this summer to spotlight the jobs, the skills, and the stories that are shaping this transformation so that youth everywhere like yourself can see where and how to get involved. And today we're exploring energy and climate finance. With over $125 trillion required globally to hit our net zero targets and adapt to climate change, the stakes have never been higher, and many countries still have a long way to go. But with that said, climate finance is also growing, with investors, businesses, and governments funding projects that cut emissions and strengthen resilience. At COP29, the wealthier nations pledged at least $300 billion per year in climate finance for developing countries by 2035 as part of the new collective quantified goal. Meeting this commitment will require strong collaboration among governments, the private sector, international organization, and communities, while ensuring that women and marginalized groups are not left behind. So this means the continued emergence of career paths in ESG analysis, sustainable investment strategy, and climate finance specialization, which are fields essential to scaling green industries and also creating more green jobs. And carbon markets, too, are expanding rapidly, offering opportunities in finance, environmental science, public policy, project management, and risk analysis. Africa's carbon markets hold huge promise with potential revenues of up to $6 billion and an estimated 30 million jobs to be created by 2030, which will position young Africans to lead the global transition in this sector as well. So I'm excited to dive into these topics today, from finance and impact investing to carbon markets and clean cooking solutions. And with that, I am pleased to hand the floor over to our moderator for today's session, Wanjiru Wembugu. Wanjiru Wembugu is the she's from the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. She's a development professional who's passionate about solving problems that matter, like we'll talk about today. She has experience supporting multi-million-dollar programs, enabling African youth to improve livelihoods by leveraging renewable energy for productive uses in agri-food systems. Wanjiru blends research, strategy, and values, being on the ground to drive impact. She believes in the power of partnerships, innovation, and youth-led solutions to shape a more sustainable and inclusive future, and is on a personal mission to visit every African country by 2040. So there is no one better to take us on this journey than our moderator, Wanjiru.
Thanks, Ava. Hello, everyone. Hope you can all hear me okay. Yeah, great. So first of all, thank you to all our lovely speakers for joining us and for everyone in the audience. I'm delighted to be here, and I'll kick it off our discussion for today. So in terms of some housekeeping, we have 45 minutes for the discussion, for the panel discussion, and then roughly 25 minutes for Q&A. I believe for our audience, there's an option to send in some questions in the Q&A function. And yeah, so let's get right into it. So I'll begin with a reflection on the current trends and things that I've seen in the sector that are a bit encouraging. So I haven't been in the sector for too long, just 3 years, and I've mostly been working on the productive use of energy side. And I find it really encouraging from the time where I began to now, just to see how it's becoming very clear to more and more people that productive use of energy is super important to just go beyond being connected to grid, just the different opportunities that it creates for youth, for employment, that would otherwise be limited if youth only could access jobs through being like technical skilled technicians and things in that nature. Right. So I will jump right into the panel discussion, and I will first begin by introducing our lovely panelists. So first we have Ugo. Ugo is an investment banker at JP Morgan, where he sits on the power and renewables coverage team in New York. Prior to JP Morgan, Ugo has worked at McKinsey and Company, SEforALL as an advisor, and as an investment associate as well. And he holds an MBA from Columbia Business School, where he is focused on the intersection of energy, climate, and finance. Then we have Hugh Sawe, who's the Senior Director for Market Development and Partnerships at Gold Standard, one of the world's leading carbon crediting standards with over 3,500 projects in more than 100 countries worldwide. In his role, Hugh is responsible for Gold Standard's partnerships with the government, corporate investment, and project development communities, as well as leading work on capacity building, advocacy, and initiatives. Prior to joining Gold Standard in 2021, Hugh worked for 8 years in the British government, most recently as its head of international carbon markets, as well as other roles in his Royal Majesty's Treasury, the Cabinet Office, and the Department of Energy and Climate Change. Next, we have Catherine Taraya. I hope I said that right. Is program specialist in the market strengthening team at CCA. She is a private sector and social enterprise professional with deep expertise of driving business processes improvements, establishing operational systems, and managing major projects. She brings with her a solid history of success in finance, business growth, opportunities marketing, networking, and training cross-functional teams. Prior to joining CCA, Catherine worked in impact management at 60 Decibels, and before she was a national consultant at the International Trade Center. She holds a Master of Engineering in Computer Systems Engineering from the University of Sheffield, a Master of Science in Management and Finance from University of Bath, and is a certified expert in climate and renewable finance from the Frankfurt School of Management and Science. Welcome, our speakers, and we'll kick it off with Ugo. So, first question goes to you. From your perspective, what makes, what are some of the most promising trends in investment for Africa's renewable energy sector, and how is the market responding?
Yeah, and thanks for that, Wanjiru, and very glad to join all of you here from New York this morning. I think my most interesting or promising trend, or the trend I'm most excited about, isn't anything that's new, to be very honest. And it's really the focus on decentralized renewable energy. I'm Nigerian. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, and I think for pretty much all of my life, I've just heard stories about how bad the grid is, the scale of the task to try and fix that. And in many ways, that could have held, us back from providing a lot of the energy that's needed. You spoke about productive uses. I think even in homes, when it comes to clean cooking, which I'm sure Catherine is very well aware of, there's just gaps across board. Obviously, a lot of this is enabled by just grid infrastructure lacking. And so I think just seeing how historically we've leaned into decentralized energy has just been a huge positive for me. I think in many cases it felt like an African solution to an African problem. Obviously, a lot of these technologies aren't necessarily unique to Africa, but it felt like we were taking an African approach to fixing the problems. I think obviously in terms of how the market is responding, a lot of this has been enabled by some of the programs we have on the continent. I think some of it is policy support, but even the likes of World Bank, SEforALL with the UF program have really leaned into providing the incentives that in many ways have contributed to making things a bit more bankable, even without the policy support now, right? I think initially there was that maybe you can think of us as being at the start of the learning curve, and with all of this kind of support being provided and private sector actors starting to play in the space, the cost of actually doing a lot of these things and the business case has actually improved over time. And so that's something that's been really exciting for me to see. I think it's exciting for the reason I mentioned, but I think another reason why, I'm really excited about the future there is seeing how other regions are really leaning into this. So currently in my day-to-day job, obviously I cover power and power companies. But just given what is going on in the US around, load growth driven by AI infrastructure, a lot of my work has been with data center clients as well, or at least trying to power data center infrastructure. And I think here they don't necessarily have issues related to the grid, but I think like demand for power is growing much quickly than, we can install new kind of at scale generation sources. And so I think even just seeing how people are leaning into behind the meter sources here and decentralized renewable energy is really encouraging. I think especially because I think the more the world leans into it more broadly, the more the business case also improves for Africa as like costs come down and things like that. And so I'm very excited about how we're really leaning into decentralized energy. I'm just curious to see how the next few years are going to look as the rest of the world doubles down to meet what is really proving to be a load growth challenge as well.
Yeah, and I mean, in the context of all this opportunity, what are some of the key risks you see that must be managed in order for us to be able to attract the scale and capital needed to meet our energy goals?
Yeah. I mean, again, like I said with the first one, I don't think anything I would say here will be new. There have been so many papers, so many articles, so many books written about this. I think the cost of capital in Africa is very high, and that in many ways makes it difficult to kind of finance projects, get the kind of returns you want, or at least even like get some of that capital to like build out projects that would still make power affordable to consumers. Because obviously, if your cost of capital is high, you either kind of absorb that cost or pass it on to customers. And more often than not, people will choose the latter, right? And so cost of capital is very high. When I think about some of the risks that drive that, I think one that maybe people don't talk about too much is just around rule of law. I think obviously when you work abroad and you just kind of see the strength of kind of judicial institutions, your ability to enforce contracts, enforce agreements, you kind of see how I think maybe having slightly weaker institutions across the continent can push away international investors, especially investors who don't really like know the space, right? A lot of them didn't grow up in Nigeria like I did, haven't spent as much time on the continent. And so when you're heading into the unknown, I think having those institutions that you can trust to back you is really critical. And so I think for as much as we can continue to strengthen those institutions, it will go a long way. I think obviously there's also just the issue around like Forex as well. International investors would more often than not be bringing US dollars. And so just how you think about, the stability of the currencies you're investing in, your ability to kind of take funds out of the country as well, as an international investor, I think are some challenges I've seen over time. Obviously, different countries are at different stages. And so, these challenges can look very different across different countries, but that's definitely a big one as well. And I think the last one, which, personally, I've seen a lot of companies innovate around, and so I think it's changing, it's just access to data. I think, again, looking from the lens of an international investor, I personally believe people have a higher perception of the risk on the continent than what actually is there. But again, you can't really blame them, right? Because, as someone who hasn't lived on the continent, I think in many ways, all you have are the stories you hear in the media and things like that. And so if that's all you have to run off, then it can be a bit challenging. But when data is there, and not just data, right, like quality data, then you can actually perform analysis. You can target consumers effectively. There's a lot more of a business case that can be built around that. And so I think there's a lot we need to do generally to kind of bring the cost of capital down, but also to improve the environment. Because ultimately, one thing I always tell people is, as an international investor, you're not just competing with other like projects in Nigeria, you're competing with projects across the world. If I'm an investor sitting in the UK or sitting in the US and I'm looking for emerging market opportunities, there are so many emerging markets that have a lot of these things in place, right? Even outside of Africa. And so we need to start to think about the competition as being other countries as well, and thinking about how the countries in Africa position themselves to kind of be well placed against some of these countries, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I think also just reflecting on why we're here today, do you see an opportunity for youth to at least have bankable projects that would enable them to be mini grid developers or other types of developers?
I mean, opportunity definitely. Also because I know people who are doing this, and so I know the opportunity exists. Obviously, Africa is, and I'll say this myself as an African, Africa can be a tough place to work. Just because I think any challenge you can imagine will be thrown at you, will likely be thrown at you. And so there's something to be said for like resilience, as a way to be able to thrive. But I think outside of that, right, there's also the question of like what even is a bankable project, which is one area I've seen maybe people struggle a bit. I think in my mind or from where I sit, when I think of bankable projects, I think about projects that have, some kind of offtake already. You don't necessarily have to have a contract signed, but you shouldn't just have like a target market either. You should have some kind of pipeline towards, who's actually going to take off the power you intend to generate. I really liked when you kicked off speaking about productive uses, because I think in my experience again on the continent, we talk about energy access in the homes a lot, but I know one thesis we had a lot when I was at SEforALL is kind of, if you power productive uses, you actually then empower people to be able to afford power in their homes. And so I think when I think about bankable projects, there's something to be said around just kind of having a clear path to offtake. Obviously, you need to have any other kind of like permits, interconnection agreement. You need to have the land and things like that. People want to see that you've secured all of that as well. And it's not really just an idea of paper. Technical reports also help a lot, and not just technical reports that you put together yourself, kind of validating your technology or validating your project. If you want this to be credible, ideally, this should be reports written by external folks. And then I think the last one, which isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but I think helps a lot, is actually just having some equity investment. So putting some money in. I mean, in my experience, investors would want to, work with someone that has some kind of skin in the game. So you don't necessarily have to raise up everything, but if you're trying to like do a project and you're bringing 10% to the table, then maybe it makes sense that you're looking for another like 10 to 20% from another equity investor, maybe the remaining 70% from debt. Just having some skin in the game helps. Obviously, like this answer would vary depending on the size of the project, what stage of the project it is as well. But I think just generally when I think about projects being bankable, that's what comes to mind. And I think in terms of just how youth can really like lean into this, I would say, one, just try and target bankable segments. Productive use, like you said, is definitely a good place to start, because that gives you something around which you can build a business case. And then finally, just be diligence ready. I think this is one I've seen a lot of people really struggle with. Obviously, for international investors, the bar might be a lot higher in terms of what documentation you need to like be able to provide, whether it's like historical financials, good forward-looking projections, technical reports, like I said, that back all of this up. And so, if you're going to meet an investor, you don't need to wait for them to tell you, oh, you need to provide this. I think ideally you want to have all of that ready in some kind of data room, where you can then move quickly as those conversations evolve.
Great. Thank you so much, Ugo, for the in-depth analysis of your perspective. Great. So over to you, Hugh. I think we first want to start with an understanding of what carbon markets are. We often hear about it, but I think not a lot of us know what it is. So could you please briefly explain on the function and impact of carbon markets in climate action and what gold standard accreditation means for African projects, both in terms of impact and financial viability?
Great. Thank you very much. And thanks for the introduction earlier as well. So, I mean, just a little bit about carbon markets to start. So carbon markets are essentially a structure to provide finance to projects that wouldn't otherwise get there by giving value to carbon reductions. That's kind of a complicated way of saying this, but essentially what you're trying to do with carbon markets is look at a project, calculate the emission reductions that have been achieved by that project, provide carbon credits to represent those emission reductions, and then find buyers who are willing to pay for those carbon credits. And the kind of idea of a carbon market is that the finance which will come to a project, kind of through the purchase of these credits, is one of the things that makes a project viable, essentially. And we as Gold Standard are a standard setter in the carbon market. And what that means is that We're an organization which has set a standard, has a set of kind of requirements, documentation, and methodologies that projects across the world can use if they want to receive carbon credits. So, for instance, if you're a company in Nigeria which is looking to distribute clean cook stoves and you want to use the carbon market as one of your sources of revenue, you can list your project with Gold Standard, our standard. You can follow our requirements. You follow the methodology that we have set. You have your impact reviewed by a third-party verification body, and we will then issue you carbon credits based on the number of emission reductions that you have achieved. And then you can sell those carbon credits in the market in order to generate revenue. And the importance of a standard setter like us is that it provides some kind of recognition and credibility for what you're doing. So there are a group of standard setters in the carbon market who are recognized by buyers, trusted by buyers, and buyers of carbon credits, whether they're companies, public sector organizations, individuals, or others, will look to purchase carbon credits which have been issued by certain organizations. And the carbon market is really changing right now, and it's changing in several kind of big ways. We've had a kind of historic carbon market, which is really based around the Kyoto Protocol and the Clean Development Mechanism under the UN. And that ran from about 2005 through to about 2020. And alongside that, you had the emergence of other standards like us, which came into the market and really mostly supported the voluntary carbon market. So companies buying credits for voluntary purposes. And one of the things that was really notable in that first stage of the carbon market is there was a pretty general perception that Africa didn't see the impact and the benefit which was seen in other parts of the world. So I think it took some time for projects to be developed in quite a few African countries, and that only really came towards the end of the Clean Development Mechanism's time. And we're now moving into this new world for the carbon market, really since 2020, where we're seeing kind of a new framework for carbon markets under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. We have a new crediting mechanism under the UN, and we're also seeing a real convergence between the kind of old voluntary market and new compliance markets and these coming together. And we're seeing a lot more professionalization around some of the services which are there in the carbon market. So it's quite an exciting time in the carbon market right now. It's quite turbulent. We've gone through a period in the last 5 years where we saw a real kind of rush of interest in the carbon market. We saw valuations increasing. That has since come down a bit in the past few years. But it's a time of real change and where there is some opportunity.
Great. And according to the gold standard landscape analysis of academic opportunity for specialist carbon market roles in 2025, how are evolving policies or practices shaping Africa's carbon markets? I think you kind of touched on that. And what resulting career opportunities and essential skills does the report identify for young professionals?
Yeah, so just some background on this. So if you go back about 4 or 5 years, so it was a time where we saw a real kind of significant growth of interest in carbon markets. So around 2019 through to 2021, there was a lot more interest in carbon markets and carbon project investment that we had seen in previous years. You saw kind of more money coming into the carbon market, financial institutions coming into the carbon market that hadn't been there before, new kind of investment coming in through to startup industries. And one of the things that we really kind of noticed then and became quite stark, there just wasn't the technical expertise to manage this growth. So a lot of the roles which are there in carbon markets require quite detailed technical expertise in project MRV methodologies, etc. And that expertise didn't really exist at the scale that would be needed if this carbon market is to grow. And it was also not that evenly distributed globally as well. So if you look at a lot of organizations kind of in the carbon market, you see a lot of staff who are based in Western Europe. You see staff who are based in India, but you don't necessarily see kind of that expertise evenly spread across the world. And at the start of this year, we commissioned a piece of work which was intended to look at the current landscape of academic opportunity for roles in the carbon market. So, if you are a young person who is based in Ghana, do you have the obvious academic route that you could take for the roles which will be needed in the carbon market? And I can share the link in the chat maybe afterwards to this report. What we were really looking at is do these academic opportunities exist in different countries, which are kind of key central points for carbon markets? And if not, what might be needed to put that in place so that young people who are looking to get into roles in the carbon market have the route to be able to do so kind of within their own borders rather than having to travel for study. And we looked at this globally, not just in Africa, but there were some interesting insights from this. And I think one of the things which is really important, kind of looking at the carbon market right now, there are some kind of core roles which really need kind of technical understanding um, uh, of methodologies of climate MRV, some of these points which I talked about earlier, so really understanding kind of how to calculate emission reductions. There are roles which need that, and those roles maybe exist in if you're looking to be a project developer, if you're looking to work for a standard, or if you're looking to work for an auditor. But as the carbon market is professionalizing, we're seeing a lot more kind of roles and a lot more areas of expertise which are needed and kind of where there'll be opportunities as the market grows. So there's opportunities in digital solutions, for instance. So AI, as will be the case for other sectors, is likely to play a really important role in helping to reduce and kind of get past some of the barriers to efficiency in the carbon market. We're seeing more need for legal services coming into the carbon market. Financial institutions are getting involved, and financing is getting involved in a way we haven't really seen at this scale before. Insurance is coming in and supporting the carbon market. There is more regulation of the market on the side of government authorities, and so there's more of a need to be able to navigate policy. So, kind of like other sectors, the growing carbon market doesn't need just one set of skills; it needs lots of different sets of skills. And I think it's really important that we see these kind of expanded as much as possible. And I think a lot of governments have a real interest in making sure that these skills are kind of based and housed within their own country rather than having to look internationally.
And I mean, of these skills, like, do we have an opportunity for either work stream to be able to create mass employment? I think, I mean, it's no secret on the continent we have a serious youth unemployment problem, and it's only gonna worsen. And I think one of the challenges we have, at least in SDG 7, is that the scope of the job of direct jobs is so limited, and it greatly outstrips the number of jobs that youth need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, just to speak openly right now, I mean, it's clear if you look at the numbers. The carbon market a couple of years ago reached the voluntary carbon market a couple of years ago reached a valuation of $2 billion kind of in value. That has since declined. So we've seen a kind of decline in kind of new project investment in transactions kind of coming through. And so we're not seeing that kind of expansion in new roles that we were seeing maybe a few years ago. We're actually seeing probably a decline in kind of roles which are coming through. So I think, especially if you're kind of looking more to the voluntary side, you're not seeing that kind of mass expansion of roles in the carbon market right now. My sense is that that will change. I think we are already seeing signs of growing use of credits for compliance reasons. So South Africa has its carbon tax, for instance. We're likely maybe to see some more use of carbon credits, which will come through under that. We are seeing governments getting involved in Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So we're seeing kind of new opportunities coming through on the compliance side. We will see the voluntary side of the carbon market coming back again as well. So I think right now isn't the sort of boom period for employment that you saw a few years ago in the carbon market, but I think it is worth looking at roles where they do exist, which can kind of be there for as the market grows in the future.
Okay. A bit discouraging, but encouraging at the same time. I think it's just generally the market conditions have been tough in the last couple of years. Just want to remind everyone in our audience that the Q&A function has been enabled, so please do send in your questions and we'll try our best to answer them. Great, Catherine, over to you. We've saved the best for last, I hope. So what are some of the major barriers and solutions for scaling clean cooking markets? I mean, you could begin with giving us a bit of background of what CCA does, and then, yeah, just provide some of the insights onto what these barriers and solutions are and what the opportunities are for the sector as we link it back to youth and jobs.
Great. Thanks for the question, Wajiro. So at CCA, I work in the market strengthening team. So the focus is on strengthening markets and mobilizing finance to accelerate clean energy access. So let me start with the barriers we still face in scaling clean cooking markets, and then I'll move on to the opportunities for young people. So on barriers, the first and most persistent challenge is affordability. So for many low-income households across Africa, clean stoves and fuels remain out of reach, sometimes costing more than 10% of a family's monthly income. And then the second barrier is finance for the enterprises, the clean cooking companies. While investment in the sector is growing, it is heavily skewed towards debt at the larger players in the sector. And then you have the smaller early stage companies where much of the innovation is happening, and they struggle to access equity and working capital. We also face policy and infrastructure constraints. So things like import duties and VAT on clean cooking equipment and fuels drive up costs, and then weak enforcement of standards slows trust and adoption as well. On top of this, last mile distribution remains difficult, especially in the rural areas. And then finally, carbon markets are both an opportunity and a challenge. So revenues from carbon credits have enabled scaling, but dependence on them does create risk. So especially as right now, organizations like ICBCM, CCA, Gold Standard are working on integrity standards to rise. But this also introduces like cost implications when the project developers and the clean cooking companies are trying to get into that side of things as well. So the good news is that solutions do exist and many are already being tested. So removing things like taxes and duties paired with innovative consumer finance models like pay, go, and revenue sharing can unlock demand. We also have results-based financing that can attract private capital while rewarding real adoption. We also need to replace the capital stack with more equity and grants while bringing local banks into the picture to finance distribution and inventory. So finally, we'll also look at the big picture. Clean cooking must be integrated into national energy and climate strategies with clear standards, high integrity carbon financing, and user-centered design. So when these solutions come together, markets can then scale rapidly. Now, looking at the opportunities for youth in the sector, what makes clean cooking so exciting is that the scale of the challenge is also the scale of the opportunity. So universal access by 2030 requires tens of thousands of new jobs every year across Africa. So youth can play a role at every level. So things like manufacturing and product innovation, like designing new stoves, e-cooking appliances, clean fuels, and distribution and last mile service, where young entrepreneurs can build networks that reach households and communities. In finance and carbon markets, where skills in data, carbon accounting, and impact measurement are increasingly valuable. And then in areas like research and impact studies, where youth can gather insights directly from households to shape better solutions. And then, of course, in entrepreneurship, so job creation, as you mentioned, employment is a big challenge in Africa. So youth that are more inclined towards starting their own businesses, from bioethanol and biogas production to fintech solutions that make clean cooking affordable. We also know that women and youth are central to building trust with households, which makes gender-responsive accelerators and mentorship programs especially powerful. So in short, While the barriers are real, the clean cooking sector is a space where young Africans can build careers with impact by combining innovation, finance, and entrepreneurship to drive both climate action and job creation.
Thank you. Thank you for that overview. Something you mentioned, you said you work on the market strengthening aspect at CA. And does that also include at least working with higher education institutions just to ensure that all facets of the market are speaking to each other to also ensure that the technical skills and business skills that the market needs are being uh, delivered from at least if it's a TVET, I mean, vocational schooling or universities.
Yeah, so we are currently working on a carbon markets education program. So it's targeted at entrepreneurs that want to enter the clean cooking sector but don't really understand the carbon market. So we're doing some self-guided learning that's going to be online, hopefully by the end of the year. And we also, so that's going to be targeted at the entrepreneur side of things. And then we're also going to have some training for banks and regulators so that it's like a holistic approach so that all different players in the sector actually get the education that they need, because a big barrier as well, carbon markets, is information and knowledge. So there's that. And then we also have our partners in the sector like Shortlist, that I know have done some training with the youth. Yeah, so there's a few different programs that are being run by different stakeholders that are empowering the youth and also helping them to get the right skills and knowledge.
Okay, that sounds awesome. Ugo, Hugh, I'll open up the floor to the both of you to respond to anything either one of you has said, or Catherine as well, before we transition to the Q&A section of the session.
Did you want to go first, Hugh, or should I? I'll go for it. Yeah. No, I mean, echo everything she said. Yeah, I think just like stepping back more broadly, what I would say is it's definitely great to see partners like the Clean Cooking Alliance kind of double down on clean cooking. When I was with SEforALL and I started at the UN, we kind of had this picture of energy just being at the center of development. I think very often you think about, the impact of energy on, economic productivity, healthcare as well, from like powering hospitals, and a lot of other lenses. But I think too many people around the world aren't really aware of clean cooking being an issue. And then also all of the challenges that come with that as well. I think on the health side, as opposed to like electrification, which kind of provides, good health, just the lack of access to clean cooking in many ways is a health issue. I don't remember exactly what the numbers are, but I just remember reading so many reports that had all the statistics around, impact on women as well, keeping them out of the job force when they have to spend so many hours kind of gathering wood. Obviously, once they then have the wood at home, the kind of health implications of actually burning wood, just like live and open in your house. And so there's so many lenses through which to look at it, where I think the only thing I would just echo is, clean cooking is a big problem. And so it's definitely great to see partners like the Clean Cooking Alliance kind of just double down on creating awareness, building capabilities, like Catherine said as well. I think it's very important to also get, the stakeholders who can actually solve the problem to understand the problem. And so I think it was very encouraging to hear that, there's also trainings being organized for like banks and regulators as well. Because unless people really understand, the scope of the challenge, but again, I think like she said, the scope of the opportunity, it's really kind of hard to contribute to fixing it as well. So you're very excited to always have clean cooking as part of these kind of energy conversations, because it's an often overlooked part of the energy problem.
Yeah, and I mean, just building on that as well. I mean, we have a couple of really interesting examples in under gold standard in Kenya, actually, of projects which are registered with our standard, which are in the clean cooking sector, but trying to go kind of very much beyond just the distribution of clean cook stoves and looking at also bringing the manufacturing in kind of as well. And so we have a Burn Manufacturing, which is a project developer with a pretty major manufacturing site in Kenya, just outside Nairobi, and then with manufacturing sites elsewhere. And what they're trying to do is to make sure that as much of the value as possible is kind of sitting there in Africa rather than kind of manufacturing taking place elsewhere and then the cook stoves being distributed in. And I think that's something, it goes back to the point I was making earlier about there being multiple, there's not just one kind of skill set which is useful. Kind of if this works well, there are multiple different skill sets and employment opportunities which come through here. So in that case, it's not just about do you understand how to kind of write a design document for a project in the carbon market. There's manufacturing opportunities which can come through there as well. There's kind of project management opportunities there, all the way through to the financing and kind of intermediation of the credits.
Catherine, you have anything to add?
Sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, I think I can just can give like a closing remark for the youth. So in clean cooking specifically, it's not a side issue. So this is central to the energy transition, to our health, to our empowerment, and to climate action. And what excites me the most is that this is also a space where young Africans can lead as innovators, entrepreneurs, financiers, community champions. There's so many different things that a young person can use as an entry point into the sector. And if you take one thing away today, let it be that the solutions are within reach, and your talent, creativity, leadership are what will turn this market into a driver of jobs and sustainable growth in the sector.
Great. Now, I have a bit of a more personal question for the three of you. So, when you were starting out your careers, did you envision yourself working within renewable energy or in the climate space? And B, what help did you get early on that really put you on the path to where you are today? Anyone can start.
Sure, I'm happy to start. Did I envision the career I have today? Absolutely not. When I tell people about everything I've done, sometimes people are usually like, oh my God, pretty impressive career trajectory. How did you have it all planned out? I think in reality, I've just kind of made it up as I've gone. So just to maybe give a bit more context, I started my career in consulting. So I was with McKinsey in Lagos. To be honest, when I started working in consulting, I wasn't even really sure what it was, but it just seemed like a great opportunity to learn a lot. It seemed like a great company. And I think in many ways it met my expectations through that lens. Spent a lot of my time working with governments on large public sector investment projects, tax administration as a way to mobilize domestic resources for deployment, and obviously some private sector clients as well, but just did a lot of everything that really exposed me to different parts of the development issue that I was passionate about, which is how I just kind of landed on energy as kind of being central to all of it, right? I had worked across different sectors, and so when I was thinking I don't really want to stay in consulting long term, I started to think about what do I want to do next. And thankfully, maybe to start to answer your second question in terms of what has helped me, I think I've been very lucky, but also very on my part, proactive in finding the right mentors. Because in my theory is, there's two ways you could learn. I think one, you could learn by making mistakes and just kind of learning from those mistakes. I think the second way is you could really just learn from people who've gone ahead of you and kind of take their experiences and their lessons with you. And so I was very lucky to have a very strong mentor of mine while I was at the firm who knew what I was passionate about, who knew what I was interested in, but who also happened to have a very strong relationship with Damilola, the CEO of SEforALL, which is essentially how I got my job at SEforALL, which were 2 fantastic years. Again, learned so much there. But after 2 years, I felt like policy was definitely catching up in many ways, but for some reason, finance was still just not following. And so I then kind of thought about, okay, the best way to maybe contribute to that is just moving into finance. And in many ways, Damilola as well also became a great mentor of mine, who then helped me kind of figure out what I did next. And basically lots of different bits and pieces have added up to me being here. And so maybe as a way to just kind of leave a message for young people is I feel like, and not to say I'm not a young person myself, because I'm still kind of, very much making this up as I go and at relatively at an early stage of my career. And one thing I would say is don't necessarily try to have it all mapped out and figured out. I think, one of my mentors as well at the firm told me clarity comes from doing. And so there's something about just like rolling up your sleeve and just doing things. And then, the more you do, the more you figure out what you want to do and what you don't want to do. And you then just kind of adapt as you go. Obviously, all three things I've done are related in some way, in the sense that I was always kind of working on energy, but I've worked in consulting, I've worked in policy, and I'm working in finance, which are all very different, areas of work. And so it's all possible. You just need to start and then just be adaptable as you go and really just lean into mentorship, right? Like I said, people who have gone before you can really give advice, but they can also really open doors for you. I know I've said mentors, but the other thing I'll add to that is sponsors. I think people don't think of them as two distinct things, but I think as you kind of grow in your career, even as an entrepreneur, right, you need to be very thoughtful about the relationships you build, who's a mentor that I turn to for advice as I'm trying to figure things out, but also who is a sponsor that is pounding the table for me when I'm not in the room to actually go out of their way and create these opportunities for me. I'll say are some of the things that have helped me get to where I am today.
I'm happy to go next then if so I remember when I was quite lucky in that the first job I got in my career was working on climate change. So I used to work in the UK government in the civil service, and I was working on energy efficiency in households. Um, and it was at the point where I realized, okay, if I stay in this sector for the rest of my career, that should be when we've addressed climate change, and we'll see what happens. But that was quite exciting when I sort of realized, well, actually, I can stay in this sector, and I've got a kind of lifelong mission to be playing a role and contributing in the period where we really need to be reducing emissions we need to be getting to net zero, and we need to have adaptation in place. And that kind of has framed what I've been trying to do. So I've tried different things within the climate space, but it's always so far been kind of set by that kind of, I guess, just kind of personal decision I've made that I have a career where I can try to make a contribution to the climate crisis that we're facing. But then if I reflect back, and I guess this is kind of a repeat of the point I've been making earlier, like if you look at lots of jobs in climate change or in carbon markets, the same exact skills could be applied to something which is very different. So when we work with lawyers, we're working with lawyers who've made a decision. Now, I want to be working on supporting climate kind of investments. I want to be working on carbon contracts. Those exact same lawyers could very easily say, now I want to do oil and gas contracts instead, or I want to do kind of property contracts. Kind of the skills aren't that different. You need to kind of know the sort of understand the market you're working in, but the skills aren't that different. Same with insurance, same with finance, same with all of these things. Actually, so I guess what I'm trying to say there is you can decide that you want to kind of really pursue a career in carbon markets or in climate change. And you can go about that by trying to find kind of the right organization and then kind of work on the skills which are needed for that. Or you can kind of develop a set of skills in a profession which is kind of where you kind of have more security, kind of insurance, whatever it is, which one of these, and then you can try to make the choice to be working on climate. So a friend of mine, his dad had worked as a lawyer in oil and gas. And when he wanted to follow his dad's footsteps to be a lawyer, but he's working as a lawyer for renewable energy projects. So he's helping to make renewable energy projects happen. And so you can make that choice to kind of find the skill set, the profession you have, and then to use that for good, essentially, and to use that in the sector that you want to be supporting. And we're seeing lots of people transitioning to either work for us as gold standard or work with us who've done really different things in the past, but they're taking all of their experience elsewhere and they're then passing that into the carbon space afterwards.
Yeah, so I'll go next. I definitely didn't think I'd be doing this. I am a computer systems engineer by training, so quite different. I started my career in the UK. I was working at Bloomberg as an equity research analyst, handling huge portfolios across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I ended up in the impact and energy space when I moved back to Kenya, and I got a job working in security. So the same job as Bloomberg, but then covering the Nairobi Securities Exchange, which is a lot smaller, so not as exciting. And that's the point at which I met Sunfund East Africa, and they are specialist solar financiers. So there's like transferable skills. So the analytics that I got from my engineering background, and then the financial knowledge from working at Bloomberg. So that was a good fit. And then over time transitioned to the International Trade Center, working with SMEs, helping to scale up their businesses, improve business practices, access to green finance, and scaling across beyond the continent, basically. I then started working more with SMEs. So I've worked with Her Hustle, Africa Yes Center, Village Capital, doing business mentorship. And then I moved on to 60 decibels, which is impact measurement. That was really exciting. So that's working with mainly investors. And we actually get to talk to the people that are supposed to be impacted by all these huge donations and investments into companies. And that's how I met the Clean Cooking Alliance. So my career has really been about like, I am doing something I'm enjoying. And then during the course of that, I'll meet an organization that's doing something that I think this would be really well aligned with my goals, with where I'm at right now. And I think I'll enjoy doing this. And then I move into that. So I think you can just start wherever you are, and you will discover what you enjoy, what you're good at as you go along. And I mean, your career is going to last on average around 40 years. So you just take your time and discover. There's a world of possibility. As long as you start somewhere, you learn what you like, what you don't like, and then you make your decisions based on that.
Thanks to the three of you. I think it's so interesting just to see how vast our paths have been. And I think it just really speaks to how our careers and how we think of our careers ought not to be in a linear way. And this is because of just where the world is and how quickly things are moving. I think there's a like a running joke that in Africa, if you're not a lawyer, an engineer, or a doctor, you're a failure. And I think that's a narrative that needs to die because, as you said, Catherine, like a career is 40 years or more, and it really just requires to be open-minded. So I think just to share a bit about my journey as well, when I was leaving undergrad a couple of years ago, I did social sciences, and then I was really intent on moving to China to do a master's of economics with a focus on Chinese economics to eventually bring African businesses to China. But never in 1,000 years would I have envisioned COVID. So it happened around the time of COVID, and I never got the chance to go. So it was in one of the classes that I was doing. I think it was on China's future. Energy was a really big component of the class, and that's where I now started to see the intersection between the role of Africa in China's future, and the intersection with energy. So I found an opportunity to intern with the Rockefeller Foundation. That was around the time GAP was starting, and yeah, the rest is history. And that's just to say that there's no one path to finding your way into clean energy, into the renewable energy space. And I also reckon it's probably going to be very different 20 years from now as well. Great. Yeah. Yes.
Here, if I could just chime in. So I think one thing you said that I wanted to definitely echo is because I think, when myself and Catherine spoke, we kind of spoke from a place of, we were doing something, we saw something else we liked or were passionate about, and we just kind of jumped at it. I think one thing about your story that I definitely just wanted to kind of double down on is finding a way to keep moving forward in the face of disappointment. I kind of left out some of those things that or some of those disappointments that contributed to me pivoting at different points. It wasn't always rosy, but I think there's just something to be said about that resilience as well. Because whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're, working at a company, life will throw challenges at you, and you have to find a way to just be resilient and like keep moving. Sometimes it means you're being forced down a path that like you completely didn't envision, which in the moment can seem really like, oh my God, I failed at this thing. What am I going to do with my life? Things are falling out of place. But sometimes in my mind, it's usually just like life redirecting you towards a different path that you're actually meant to follow. And so just wanted to make sure that I wasn't lost, because, I think things can get really disappointing at different points. And it's okay to, maybe take a day or two, a week, whatever you need to really just like, be down, cry if you need to, rant at whoever you need to, but then just kind of get up and keep going again and just kind of embrace whatever path life is forcing you down instead. I think it's definitely a mindset that really differentiates people who rise to the top versus people who, maybe just keep making excuses about their situation and what life is throwing at them as well.
Yeah, totally agree with you, Hugo. So I'm gonna transition us into the Q&A. So we have some questions. Let's see, from Meti. What specific job roles are emerging in sectors, and what skills and qualifications are most valuable for professionals looking to enter this field? I think this is a bit similar to the question that I think Karel had as well. So I think off the top of my head, I think unless it's a very technical role for a very specific job, you can afford to be a generalist. What at least is helping me is just having the right mindset, the curiosity, and always be willing to learn and go outside of your comfort zone. I think that will help you navigate within this sector or any other sector that you may not have the technical expertise for. But I'll open it to our other speakers for any additional comments.
Yeah, that was just building on your point. That's the I think in response to one of the questions, I've shared the link to this report which we did earlier this year, this landscape analysis. And one of the things that came through there was a kind of some gap in some of the technical skills which are needed for certain roles in the carbon market. But then one of the other things that came through is just the need for some of the softer skills, which, as you say, the more general skills which are necessary, whatever your role. Like resilience is definitely needed in any role, but like just like project management, efficiency, good writing, all of these things which can be applied in different roles, but really are always important. So I think it's worth not just thinking about the qualification that you need, but also thinking about whether you've got the kind of softer skills which are necessary across all different functions, because these are really key to being effective.
Catherine, there are, I think, two questions for you. The first one is from Serge, who says, I'm currently developing a clean cooking project, and I'm very interested in understanding how it could qualify for gold standard certification. Sorry, so maybe that's Hugh. I would
That's
greatly,
great.
yeah, I'd greatly appreciate your guidance on the following question. So about project certifications, what types of projects are eligible for gold standard certification? What are the specific criteria for clean cooking projects to be approved, and what types of evidence and data are required to demonstrate emission reductions?
Yeah, I mean, this is one where maybe I'd be happy to follow up separately. So I think I've left my email address in response to another question. So please feel free to reach out to me. But on our website, so on the Gold Standard website, we have a lot of information about project eligibility, the different methodologies that we have, which are available. But just as a short answer, so clean cooking projects are kind of one of the key project types that we have under Gold Standard. Renewable energy historically has been an important one and still is in many countries in Africa. Reforestation is also eligible under Gold Standard. And for the more specific criteria, maybe we follow up after this call.
Great. Uh, Catherine, this one is for sure, it's for you. So this is from Ruth, and they're asking, as we pursue the technical skills in carbon markets and climate finance, what opportunities or interventions exist in the non-technical side to support market growth, especially in communications and digital upskilling for young people for better community engagement and impact reporting?
Yeah, so I think on the non-technical side, so opportunities are so many. So the first would be last mile distribution and service delivery, where you can join as sales agents, pay-go operators. The second would be research, data impact measurement. I worked at 60 decibels, and there's so much demand for enumerators, analysts, and field researchers. And those roles, you don't need experience, and you can be trained on the job, so you can just start like right from the bottom. And they can actually give a very good foundation for careers in policy and finance later on in life. And then, of course, there's the entrepreneurship. That's always an opportunity for those that are like motivated to get into business. On the skills side, I think if you have skills like financial literacy, fundraising, pitch development, marketing and customer relationship management, that's really strong. Soft skills like being able to problem solve with customers, adaptability, so things can change at any time. So just being able to adapt to the environment and pivot. And then, of course, community engagement. So this comes in with, I think she mentioned communication skills. So we really need community buy-in to clean cooking, and we really need, so youth and women are the most, I think, able to approach households and talk to them and convince them and get the buy-in. So there's a lot that you can do. I don't know if the second half of the question relates to training. So with training, I mentioned the CCA upcoming training, so self-guided learning. And then there's just other resources. I think Shortlist has some resources as well. So yeah, there's a lot to help you upskill, but even before upskilling, there's a lot of entry points that are open to use even as we speak.
Thanks. Thanks, Catherine. So I think we have a couple of questions from Karel, but just to prioritize them. Basically, one of the questions is, I think one of the biggest problem in Africa is lack of information or access to it. What can be done to improve it according to you? It could be Ugo or Catherine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah. So, Catherine, I'm happy to go first. The question was around, there's a lack of data on the continent. What can be done to improve that? I mean, I really think what can be done to improve it is just, if you really, see there's a challenge there, which I think we all do, and you're really passionate about kind of closing that gap, then just go ahead and do it, right? I have a friend who started this company in Nigeria called Steers, Stears. And I remember when it just kind of started as an idea of, oh, exactly what you said, there's data lacking in the market. How do we kind of, play a role in fixing it? And so it just started by choosing a segment and saying, oh, why don't we do some kind of surveys to gather data around this? And now the company has really expanded to a point where investors that operate in the continent actually are using it as a source of information. Obviously, over time, they've pivoted their strategy now where they really focus on providing data for investors. So data that investors can use to analyze, market opportunities, obviously some in the energy space as well. And so I really just think that like for challenges like this, you could if you're seeing gaps, the quickest way to kind of like fix those gaps is maybe just roll up the sleeves and be a bit entrepreneurial around it. And I think, it doesn't necessarily have to deviate from, a passion in climate, for example, right? Maybe you envisioned, oh, I'm very interested in climate. What can I do in the space? But there's information lacking, that doesn't really seem like a climate related job. You can make it a climate related job in terms of, okay, if you feel like there's information lacking, for example, in the clean cooking space. I think I saw a comment or a question around how, oh, I haven't really heard about clean cooking before. Maybe then you want to pick a business case around, can we gather data that starts to support investments for clean cooking? I feel like there's so many challenges that, when you kind of see a gap, obviously the quickest way to think about addressing it is just to be entrepreneurial around it. Or you could choose to maybe be more of someone who advocates for the need for it, right? I think obviously you still need to be kind of tactical there in terms of who are you advocating to and what are you hoping to achieve? Are you speaking to entrepreneurs that can actually see the opportunity and maybe go create those solutions that are needed? But I think that's the way I would think about it. Usually I try to tell people, I think just echoing what Catherine said either is like earlier is, obviously there's a lot of challenges in Africa, but you can actually reframe those challenges as opportunities to be entrepreneurial and to kind of deliver solutions that are fit for purpose as well.
Yeah, I think that's well answered, Wanjiro. Nothing to add.
Okay. So I think then that wraps up, unless there are no last minute questions, that wraps up our Q&A section. Um, so the last section is our closing remarks, and that will be given by Arissa. Arissa is a communications and advocacy professional at Sustainable Energy for All, SEforAll, where she serves as a communication, advocacy, and partnerships analyst. In this role, she develops and implements strategies to advance a just and inclusive energy transition globally. Building on her previous experience as a communication intern for SEforAll's people-centered programs, Arissa has a deep focus on clean cooking, gender, and youth initiatives. She holds a master's in applied human rights from the University for, you're gonna have to help me with that one. But yeah, over to you, Arissa.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, and a sincere appreciation to all the participants that attended the entire series. On behalf of SEforAll and Shortlist Futures, I want to emphasize that our summer webinar series, like much of our work, is driven and inspired by your commitment and interest as young professionals dedicated to shaping a sustainable energy future in Africa. As we wrap up the third and final session of Activating Africa's Green Economy through Youth Employment series, I want to reflect on our collective journey throughout. So we began in June, Cooling the Planet, diving into exciting career paths within subsectors such as cold storage, cooling technologies for healthcare, and sustainable agriculture. Throughout, we focused on practical guidance and labor market insights to help you navigate opportunities in energy access and energy efficiency. A common theme echoed by our expert speakers has been the essential need for young professionals to build transferable skills. Stakeholder engagement, financial literacy, time management, and effective communication. These are all critical for success in the green economy. In our second session on digital and tech careers powering the climate transition, you were encouraged to leverage your digital fluency and entrepreneurial spirit. As digital natives, youth are well positioned to innovate and collaborate, whether that is as entrepreneurs joining the forces or as startups expanding across borders. Building effective solution means understanding both local challenges and data that informs them. Today's discussion brought us into the rapidly evolving world of innovative finance and carbon markets. With insights from experts across sectors, we explored the expanding opportunities driven by investment in renewable energy. As market grows, it is clear that we young people who are ambitious and proactive will not only find their place, but they will create new spaces for themselves and others. The energy and curiosity that you brought to these webinars embody the immense power of youth voices united for collective action. Going forward, I'd like to close the webinar with 3 messages. 1, invest in green skills. As reiterated by our speakers today, both technical and soft skills. As young professionals, we must expand our expertise through continued learning and training, focusing on both technical and soft skills. In similar way, we must embrace entrepreneurship, find market gaps, innovative, bold solutions, and address distinct challenges and opportunities. 2, explore careers in energy access and energy efficiency because there is room for everyone. To this, we'd like to invite you to use SEforAll's career guide as a starting point, and we will share the relevant links in the chat as well. And 3, build strong networks through collaboration. Sustained partnerships are crucial. Connect with Africa's largest climate career job board via Shortlist Futures. Link also will be shared in the chat. And above all, as a conclusion, keep seeking out opportunities fueled by investment in sustainable energy across the continent. Your ambition and proactive approach will power Africa's and global energy transition, creating resilient, just, and inclusive future for generations to come. Thank you again for your dedication, vision, and leadership. Let's keep championing change together.
Thank you, everyone. Unless we have any last-minute remarks, I think we are done for today. I hope you all had a good time, and thank you, Ugo, Catherine, for your insights as well.